Hi guys, Oliver here and welcome back to my channel. It is a rather unusual start into a vlog today because it is 11:30 in the middle of the night and as you can see it's pitch black around me. So I recently posted a few images of the Milky Way and people were asking me, how do you get them so clear? How do you make them pop? And this is exactly what we are trying to attempt tonight. There are a few difficulties, so one is where I live is a rather light polluted area, and if you can get that, yeah, that bright spot up there, this is actually a half moon, so this is going to add light to the scene and makes it even more difficult. The third point is, where I live here, it's end of May, the galactic center of the Milky Way won't be visible until July. Nevertheless, we're going out and trying because it's a clear night and it would be a shame not to attempt it. After a short drive, I arrived at the place where I wanted to be, which is called Simmons Yacht, or more precisely Yacht Rock. Before we can make images pop and work out stars and the Milky Way, we first have to take the footage. When I'm out on a night like this, the first thing I'm gonna do is usually grab my second camera, set it up and try to capture a time-lapse. Okay, my camera is on the tripod and the first thing we gotta do is we have to focus. To do that, it is really important that you switch your camera to manual focus. Autofocus in this light, I know none that will work. So, how to focus? In daylight, I figured out this is exactly the position the focus ring has to be when it is an infinity focus. The second option is a little more tricky, and what it requires is usually a light in the distance. When you're lucky, you have a very bright star in the sky that you can use. I am quite lucky that I have two bright lights over there in the distance. We're going to 10 times magnification on the screen, and then we are manually trying to get it as good in focus as possible. And yes, I think there we are. The next step, we need to find our composition and our settings. I start with rather high ISO, let's say 6400. Now we have to determine our shutter speed. And regarding the shutter speed, you may have heard of something like the 500 rule. What it means, on a full frame camera, you take the value 500 and divide it by the focal length of your camera. On a crop camera, this value is reduced to 300. I mentioned before, I want to shoot on a 10mm focal length, and 300 divided by 10 is 30. So 30 seconds would be our maximum exposure time for that. I intend to go a step further down, so I'm shooting on only 25 seconds in manual mode. Aperture wide open, 3.5 on that particular lens. And I'm trying to do the very first shot on ISO 6400. The first image is pretty much exactly what I expected. It is way too bright. That means first thing I do, I reduce the ISO to 2500 and we are firing exactly the same shot. Now the second image looks already way better, but it's still way too bright, but we can see the Milky Way going down to ISO 1600. This one looks already way better. One more adjustment and we should be ready to go. I ended up with a final settings only 20 seconds and ISO 1250. The shorter exposure time gives me the opportunity to take more images, and more images in a time-lapse means it's a longer little movie clip. All I got to do now is set up my interval timer, fire it and just let it run. We carry on with the other camera and see what we can do with that. Now I got the second camera here. It's my full frame, and the first lens we're choosing today is my 16 to 35mm f4. So it's not faster, but it's the widest one I have. And what I'm after right now is a single shot. First manual focus, stabilizer off, and focus is done. I've already found my composition. The settings, we are at 20 seconds f4 obviously, and therefore the ISO is a little bit higher. It's set to 2000, and let's fire the first shot. Good, what I see in the back of the camera looks quite alright. Now, the issue is a single image of the night sky at ISO 2000 will not give me the results I desire. The reason for that is, even though the full frame performs pretty well on high ISO, there is always a noise. To overcome that, there's a little trick, and I'm taking about 10 to 20 consecutive shots of the same frame now, and stack them later on in a program called Sequitur. Why are we stacking Milky Way images? Noise is a random thing. There is no pattern to it. Every single image will have that noise, that distortion at a different position. But the pattern of the stars will always stay the same. And clever software will be capable of removing that. So they can identify the stars, put them all together, and try to electronically reduce the noise. And this is exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'm taking 20 shots of the skies. So we have our sky images, but in all of them the foreground is obviously way too dark. So what I'm doing now, I change the settings of the camera. Now we're on 30 seconds, ISO 6400, and I'm taking another, let's say, 6, 7, 8 images of that foreground. We're going to stack them separately, so let's take the images for the foreground now. This is basically how I take the images for my Milky Way captures, or how I take the single frames for them. So now it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and hopefully you got all the images I want. The complete panorama, single shots. And the goal today was, I wanted to demonstrate you don't need to be afraid of light polluted areas. You don't need to be afraid if you don't have a super fast lens. As I said, that one here, my 1635, is an f4 only. And you don't need to be afraid of high ISO. You can still take images of the Milky Way. What I do now, I pack everything together. Driving home, I get a few hours of sleep, and I'll be back on the computer where we're going into the processing part of it. After a very enjoyable night out, I had a few hours of sleep, and for me nothing tastes like the first coffee in the morning. Ah, what a treat. Okay, I got everything on the computer now, and at the first look on the videos from last night, I have to apologize, it looks a bit like out of a horror movie. I really must work on my lighting when I film myself in the darkness. But I'm glad you weren't scared and run away, you're still here, so yeah, we can crack on. When I was out there last night, I could barely see the Milky Way with my eyes. The reason for that is I didn't give my eyes enough time to adapt to the darkness. The thing with the human eye is it takes about 20 minutes for the full adaptation process. It really helps when you know how to operate your camera blind, when you know where all the controls are and what they're doing. But sometimes you just have to turn the light on. For me, a head torch in that case is essential. And if it's only to see that you rotate your camera at the right angle when you're shooting a panorama. When you are thinking of getting a head torch yourself, my recommendation would be that you're having one that's producing a red light. The reason for that is the red light is way less disturbing for the human eye than the white one. So just keep that in mind, and the adaptation time will simply be shorter. The data we have produced is enough for, well, 3 totally different themes. The first one is a time-lapse, which I shot separately on a camera. And the second one was a single image, which we're going to stack and process in Photoshop. And the third one will have the addition of stitching a panorama together. All these 3 themes have different processing techniques. So I have decided to split this material into 3 different videos. The first one today will be the processing of the time-lapse in Lightroom only. The second one, I will show you how I'm going through for single images on the panorama, because that technique is the same. And the third one will be a little bonus from material we have from our time-lapse, but more at the end of the video. So for now, let's start up Lightroom, jump in and see what we're going to do. Over a period of about 2 hours I took roughly 280-290 images full time-lapse, and just for easier demonstration I copied 10 of them in a separate folder. We're working on them right now. This is our scene as the camera has captured it. I said before I could barely see the Milky Way with the bare eye. Here in the RAW, the way I captured it, it's just, yeah, you see a hint here in that area. When we are moving into the middle, roughly about 1 hour in, you see the Milky Way has moved here, and when we're going right to the end, the sky is turning blue, so we're shooting a transition into blue hour, and I would really like to keep that because I think it's going to make a nice effect at the end of the time-lapse, but the Milky Way is already up here, so we have a movement over the sky from roughly here to there, where the Milky Way will move across the sky. The scenery itself, it's underexposed. We see the stars, we can guess where the Milky Way roughly is. Then we have this horrible light pollution here at the bottom of the valley, or at the bottom of the sky area and on the right. And at the bottom, down in the valley, over the great trees, the blacks are really drowned already. None of this helps to make our processing easier, because what I would normally do, let me demonstrate you that. First of all, I enable the lens profile correction. It's removing a little vignetting in the corners and distortion. And the standard editing for purely the Milky Way would be like I increase the exposure. I also increase contrast because we want to work out the darks and the lights in the Milky Way itself. Push the highlights, remove the shadows, do the same for the whites and the blacks. And then I push the clarity, and here in the tone curve, same again, pushing the lights, removing the darks. And ideally here on the top left in the preview window you can already see this is what brings the Milky Way out. But it's going to be counterproductive in our case because the lights here on the horizon would already be blown out. So we can't do that. What we do instead, our modifications will be more subtle for the overall image. I'll be very careful with the contrast here, and as well with the shadows. I don't want to take them out because the center of the image would become very dark. Just pushing the whites a bit, leave the blacks where they are, and yeah, the clarity, everything just a little less. I just push it that far that the lights here on the horizon are not blown out. The next step, we're choosing a radial filter, and now we're trying to make further modifications in the sky only. Adjust that a bit. We invert our radial filter, so all the next modifications will only be inside the radial filter. So here we have a slight contrast increase. Same for the highlights. I don't want to push the exposure too far because of the noise introduction, but I really want to have some whites and blacks out, and most important, the clarity. The clarity slider introduces a lot of noise, and the stars here around the edges and the corners, we don't really need them because all the action is our Milky Way, which moves across the sky, so that area until here. So to work against that, I'm simply removing texture out of it. Makes it look a little more natural. I mean, the final result will not be natural at all because we're working it out and we're trying to kind of overexpose or simply work out the Milky Way in a way the human eye doesn't really see it. That's the goal. So let's make that radial filter a bit smaller because I really don't want to affect these highlights on the horizon too much. Going back to the overall, let's see what happens when we're taking the exposure down. Okay, looks better on the horizon, and that gives us more room to work on our sky only. Could even expose it more. Okay, not too much. You see what happens in the preview window? It gives these halos, and we really want to try to avoid them. But in the preview window you can already see how the Milky Way is slowly coming out. Okay, to increase that effect now, I said the area we want to work on is this one here. We are simply adding a second radial filter. Invert that as well. And we're only using that now for the area where we anticipate our Milky Way to be visible in the scenery. So roughly about here, make it a little wider because it goes further up. Again, it's an inverted radial filter. We do pretty much the same. We increase our exposure slightly. Contrast is what we want. The highlights out to here, see, to make the Milky Way pop, but still not too much. Shadows out, whites in. Let's see how far we can push it, and the blacks out a bit. Again, clarity to make it really pop. Yeah, perhaps we're going back to our initial one and we're reducing the saturation. I'll show you in a second why. Okay. As a compensation in the main image, we're just increasing the white rose a bit. So that's already a pretty good start. But at this point, let's do the following. We're simply selecting all of our images, and now we're synchronizing all of the settings. You click check all to activate all these checkboxes and synchronize the settings we did for the first image to all of the image across the entire series. So let's pick one out of the middle that still looks acceptable, and when we're looking at the end here, we have the issue that the blue is way too overexposed. To work against that, we're simply going down to our HSL or color settings and reducing the saturation of our blues in the sky, because I really don't want it that bad in the end. Good, synchronize that back. That's the beauty in Lightroom, the synchronize function. Now all the images are still selected, and even though I made modifications in the last one, that modification will, after the sync, be applied in the first one as well. Okay, I think we have a pretty good starting point here. What is disturbing is these drowned blacks at the bottom. So there are actually some trees, and I don't want to have them black, I want to have them a bit greenish. Let's put a bit of light in. So to do that, simply adding another radial filter. There we go. Yeah, reducing the contrast and push the shadows. Yeah, then slowly we're seeing the trees in the valley coming back. But you've also noticed that the brights here above the horizon have become brighter too. So what we're doing, we're using off our radial filter, we're activating the range mask. And we're choosing the luminance range mask. Now, because we only want to affect the dark parts, we simply make that visible, what is actually selected. So everything that is red now in the image the shadows will be pushed. But we don't want to have that in the bright, so we're simply taking the brights out of our range mask until we've only affected the darks. Now when we're pushing the darks, you see only the bottom part will be affected. Reverse it, pushing them, and we are not increasing the brights above the horizon. So instead of taking the shadows too far, you can also increase the exposure a little bit. Okay, what else can we do? The Milky Way is now already visible. Again, look at the preview window and you see what I mean. But perhaps we can add just one more for that area here, just to see if we can push it a little further. No, not really in the exposure. And the contrast is a dangerous thing because it will affect the blues in the last images, and not using the shadows that far. Until, I think, it looks pretty alright. Now we have two more disturbing things. One is here right in the bottom of the horizon. You remember at the beginning of our video, these two bright lights were helping us to focus properly, but now they are really disturbing, and I think they're drawing attention away from the main scene. So I don't know how you feel, but my eye goes always down to that. So what we're doing, we're just cloning it out like this. Let's see what Lightroom is coming up with. No, that looks bad. Let's choose the other side. Yeah, I think I can live with that. Now there's one more thing left. What is looking pretty alright here in the preview, when we're zooming in the 100% view, in the details this is pretty much a noisy mess. So we really need to reduce that. The reason for the image becoming so noisy is because we've really pushed shadows and whites and increased contrast, but we can steer against that. First of all, we have a standard setting of our sharpening. We don't need it that much. And sharpening, you should be very careful with that. You can mask it. If you hold the Alt key and move that masking slider, you will see the image turns white. White means everything that is white will be sharpened. So we are masking parts of the image out until I really only have the important bits left. I really want to sharpen, which is the area of the Milky Way, maybe the horizon line. Don't need much more. And the second bit, now we're working against the noise, so we're increasing the noise reduction. Same with the color noise in here. Another thing we can try here is increasing the contrast in the noise reduction. Yep, looks alright. So what we're doing, we're still having all 10 images selected. We're synchronizing again, just making sure we have everything. And double check towards the end how it moves. Okay, one image out of the middle. Here we go. I think we can live with that. And the final one at the end, where the sky is turning blue. Same here, we have to give it a moment to apply everything. Yeah. Milky Way visible. And this is it. Good. Once we're done with all of that, what I would normally do, if you would have a single image, which we don't have, is I would work out the Milky Way a little further with an adjustment brush. I show you what I would normally do and why I'm not doing it here. So we activate the adjustment brush, and what I do, just add a bit of contrast, the usual stuff, highlights in, shadows out, same for the whites and the blacks, and a little more clarity. And then we're just working that out our way here throughout the Milky Way, just to make it pop even more. So something like that here. I'm not going through the entire process now, but you get the idea. Just as a demonstration, when I now sync this to all of the images, so what you see here, our Milky Way has moved further to the right, but our adjustment brush is still here in the area. So the adjustment brush does not move across the horizon when the Milky Way moves, and this is the reason why I'm not using it here. So delete everything, sync it back again, and this is one of the differences when we are processing images for a time-lapse or as a single image. When I now choose my first image of a set here, first one only, and we compare what we had before and what we have worked out, I think this is as far as I will push it in Lightroom. Bear in mind, we're about to create a time-lapse, and time-lapse will be shown as 24-25 images per second. We really don't want to push it any further. What is left for me to do, I simply copy these settings now here, develop settings, copy them all again, going back to the full set, choose the first image out of the series, develop settings, paste them in, and now I synchronize everything as I've just showed you with the small set. Good, this is what we have. Now we need to export our images. As I said, we're not choosing a TIFF format because we're just working or using these images in a time-lapse now. So exporting them as JPEGs. The quality 92%, for me that works pretty well. And what we do, we resize them to fit. My time-lapse is planned to be in a full HD size, so it's only a 1920 by 1080p. And I make them slightly larger. So I simply crop them in the video editor, and it also gives me a little flash to create a little panning throughout the time-lapse. That's pretty much it. So I export them all, and once that is done, I'll be back with the time-lapse itself. Good, once everything is exported, all we have to do is we have to assemble our time-lapse. What program you choose, leave it with you. Time-lapse assembler, Photoshop can do it. I choose my video editor, which is DaVinci Resolve. I've prepared it already, but the steps are pretty simple. All we have to do is first we need to import our media, which is our set of single images, which is here in my subfolder. Simply select them all from top to bottom and open them. I've done that already, and it gives me this. When you scroll over it, you already see it has put together all of the single images. And I simply grab that and drop it here in my timeline, which I already did for this one here. And now I mentioned, just before mentioned the size and a little panning effect. So what I do at the beginning of the video, I'm changing the zoom factor. So this is pretty much our original. I make it a little larger, and I also change the position for both axes, X and Y. And I do the same at the end of the video, just with slightly different parameters. And when we're moving across, you see that just creates that artificial panning effect. So now I don't have a panning head for that, so I simply make it in the software. Everything that's left now, to export it, 1920 by 1080p as an MP4, my standard format, add it to the render queue, and simply start rendering it. Will be pretty quick. That'll be done in less than a minute. I put a bit of music underneath, and the final result after all that work looks like this. Well, a long night out, lack of sleep, a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of CPU power, and all of that for 11 seconds of time-lapse video. Well, some of you may say it's not worth the hassle. I, however, find it very rewarding creating these little clips and seeing the final result. Good. If you were watching the video, you've seen, or you may have noticed, that there was a lot of action going on in the sky. Well, I am no astronomer, so I cannot tell was it really a meteor shower or were most of them actually just satellites or anything going on. But right at the beginning, you remember that I mentioned a bonus video, and when we're taking images over 2 hours of the night sky, we will have a lot of them in the frame. And as a bonus, in the third video of our little mini-series about the Milky Way photography, we are creating one single image where we are putting all of these meteor satellites, what it is, together in one image, and I'm quite sure it will look pretty interesting. Okay, you made it to the end of part 1 of our little Milky Way mini-series. Part 2, I will be showing you how to process single Milky Way images on the panorama, including the stacking of the images. Part 3, we just spoke about that little bonus video. I hope you got some useful information for your own Lightroom editing. Also hope you enjoyed it. If so, hit like, leave me a comment, tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button that you don't miss any of these upcoming videos. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to see you next time.